So also a warm welcome from my side. I think it's clear for everybody of us that these Achaemenid workshops are somehow a following up of the Achaemenid history workshops that took place in the 80s and 90s with great figures in the field. So, and I am now switching position as chairing the first session that is called Panel 1, Achaemenid, Persia and the West. We will have two presentations on this, starting first with Elspeth Dusenberry. I'm very glad that finally, Elspeth, we met in person after so many years of reading each other's works, and I think what you have been doing in the last decades on Anatolia on the one hand, on this specific field as a bridge between East and West, but also on your work on Gordion is just absolutely important. You are going to talk about current trends in scholarship regarding Achaemenid material and visual culture. So please, Elspeth, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It is so exciting to be here. To restart an Achaemenid workshop series is a bold and innovative move, and its timing is superb. My thanks go to Rahim Shayagan and Robert Rollinger for including me in this first Achaemenid workshop and suggesting I try to speak on this rather confounding topic. I cannot wait to learn what everybody else has to say and contribute over the next days, both via formal papers and in informal discussion. I must confess this paper has been difficult to write. It has been roughly 30 years since the last publication of the original Achaemenid history workshops appeared, Achaemenid History 8, and a huge amount has been written on Achaemenid material and visual culture since then. For this talk, I picked around 2000 as the beginning date of my investigation. Large numbers of works on Achaemenid material and visual culture were being published by the late 20-teens. That dropped off with COVID, but overall there are so many recent studies and different kinds of studies that it's impossible to present anything like a comprehensive overview. The direction scholarship has followed are disparate and varied, and they explore myriad approaches and ideas. This is wonderful and to be expected in a thriving field of study, but I fear I am about to insult practically everyone by not granting adequate attention to their work or misrepresenting a core feature of their research, and for this I apologize up front. There are two separate phenomena I'd like to touch on today. One is current trends in research, and the other is current trends in publication. I'll start with the latter. Three noteworthy trends, I think, characterize recent publications of Achaemenid material and visual culture. The quantity of high-quality specialized studies that has appeared in the last 20-odd years as standalone books or articles is spectacular. These include detailed studies of seal impressions, pottery and architecture, the use of color, glass and glazed bricks, zooarchaeological and archaeobotanical evidence, sculpture, coins, figurines, weapons, jewelry, and much more. This outpouring of first-rate scholarship enables all other developments in the field. There have been two additional streams of publication that are particularly noteworthy, I think. One is the proliferation of compilation volumes, often as Festschriften or emerging from conferences. These include the magnificent publication by the British Museum, The World of Achaemenid Persia, and Jean Perrault's spectacular Le Palais de Darius à Suse, as well as the gloriously illustrated Parsler, Anadolu da Kudret Vigurkem, or the Getty's magisterial catalog of their recent exhibit, Persia, Ancient Iran, and the Classical World. Outstanding volumes that incorporate historical approaches together with visual and material culture include Jacobs and Rollinger's Der Achämenidenhof, as well as Darya Ian Rollinger's Iran and its histories, and most recently Jacobs and Rollinger's multi-volume companion to the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The combination of standalone specialist studies with compilation publications enables research into and discussion of material from the Achaemenid Empire in a way never before possible. Wow. And this brings me to the third publication trend I want to mention, the availability of online resources. The internet has had a huge impact in the last couple of decades. Some consortia, like Achaemenid.com, pull together disparate visual resources and make them available online, as well as offering online publication streams, such as the peer-reviewed online journal Arta. Online databases make excavated and other collections of artifacts accessible to all. Some museums, like the British Museum or the Louvre, now make their collections available online increasingly and even offer free images for publications. Some presses, like the Oriental Institute Press of the newly renamed, I'm going to get this wrong, Study of Ancient Cultures, North Africa and West Asia at the University of Chicago, make all their publications available online for free. Other resources are also rich. In pulling together this presentation, I looked at JSTOR and WorldCat, checked out Google Scholar and ResearchGate, and then turned to academia.edu. Oh my. My search for Achaemenid turned up over 27,600 items. That is tremendous and provided a gateway to a ton of interesting information. I do not use social media myself, but I gather for those that have moved past the dinosaur stage of evolution, Twitter is a very valuable resource for notification of new publications. And podcasts are an increasingly prolific and useful source of information, including in teaching, where we can assign them to our students as homework. The importance of online ecosystems is tremendous. I think the availability of enormous amounts of information online is just wonderful, at the same time that I worry a little about the apparent pressure, especially on younger scholars, to maintain an online presence. In addition, helping students learn the critical skills required to sift good information and high-quality scholarship from unreliable sources is something that will be increasingly important for us to discuss as ChatGPT roars into the picture. Regardless, the overall impact of online publication is enormous. The accessibility of information online suddenly makes it possible to conduct research into Achaemenid matters even if you do not have a library nearby that would support such work, including in places like smaller town Iran or Turkey, or like Boulder, Colorado, where we are 1,000 miles away from the nearest research library. And online accessibility lets us learn what our colleagues in other countries are doing in a way that is magnificent, even when global politics prohibits visiting in person. This current trend in publication is a very thought-provoking one. So, let us now turn to consider a few trends in actual research into Achaemenid material and visual culture. It is thrilling to see how the field has been developing. Some of the trends are things one might expect based on developments in other fields, but there is so much excellent new scholarship on Achaemenid material and visual culture that it's hard to pinpoint specific directions. Here, these are the categories into which I eventually sifted the hundreds of works I reviewed in considering this paper. You will see they are many. You will not be surprised, and may well be relieved to know I am not going to talk about all of them today. Perhaps the most significant overarching trend I've observed is the mainstreaming of scholarship. Historians now regularly draw on Achaemenid material and visual culture as sources of evidence. And Achaemenid studies overall now regularly form part of publications by classicists and other scholars working in fields that 30 years ago did not include Achaemenid material or scholarship in their considerations. This is great. One trend that struck me is a shifting perception of borders. The 1980s and 90s saw a major change away from a traditional sense of East and West, of the decadent, despotic, and defeated Orient versus manly, free, and victorious Occident. Scholars at that time vigorously challenged obfuscating, falsely normativizing dichotomies with their roots in an anachronistic sense of the nation state and the ascendancy of Europe. And the impact on the field at the time and ever since was dramatic. They pushed the pendulum strongly toward understanding the Achaemenid Empire by using internal Achaemenid sources. And in the last 15 or so years, that same pendulum has swung back again to reincorporate sources from outside the empire as legitimate lenses through which to view and resources to help understand Achaemenid imperial happenings. Thus, as I was grouping the publications I assembled to consider this paper, one large category was beyond the borders. It included works about the Achaemenid Empire written using visual and material evidence from Greece, Bulgaria, the Caucasus and beyond, Central Asia, India, Bahrain, the Arabian Peninsula, and elsewhere even as far as China. It also included material from the time after the end of the Achaemenid Empire, dissolving temporal as well as geographical borders. I am excited by the opportunities enabled by considering cultural entanglements in such fluid ways. These include interesting recent reanalyses of the Stoa of the Athenians at Delphi, recognizably manipulative Achaemenidizing power statements in the ceramics of Armenia or the architecture of the Caucasus, military strategy and expression in Central Asia, trade and prestige in the Persian Gulf. Athenian painted pots are being folded back into scholarly discourse and literature as legitimate and complex sources for understanding Achaemenid cultural history, not just seeing Persians as other, but recognizing intercultural communication and interaction in productive ways. With this development comes a change in conceptualizing the empire itself as having an edge, a border. Particularly in the last 5 or 10 years, scholarship has explored the empire in ways that don't emphasize its boundaries, but rather consider its permeable membranes of interaction within and across modern geographical definitions. This is as true of intra-imperial boundaries between regions within the empire as it is of interactions around the blurred zones of what used to be considered edges of imperial dictation. Another recurrent theme in scholarly literature of the last 20-odd years has to do with seeking and finding Persians. This seems like a paradox, a contradiction to the suggestion I've just made that scholars are thinking in multidirectional and cross-cultural ways, but when you think about it more closely, it makes a lot of sense. Finding things that are recognizably Achaemenid expressions allows for consideration of cross-cultural expressions. Indeed, it is a sine qua non. Scholars have been seeking and finding a number of overtly Achaemenid markers, visual or material expressions that allow us to consider Achaemenid chronology, ideology, the imperial impress, and sometimes even physical presence, at the same time that they enable sophisticated analysis of lived experience by individuals. There are 3 primary indicators archaeologists have been using recently to identify Persian presence or Achaemenid influence. Pottery, particularly the cup shape called the Achaemenid bowl, column bases or other elements that reflect the columns at Persepolis, and iconography that reiterates central Persepolitan expressions of power. Achaemenid bowls have been the focus of much scholarship. I'm going to show you images of ones from Sardis, but recent studies have demonstrated their presence across the empire. They are instantly recognizable in the archaeological record and prolific. And it seems increasingly clear that they really do function as markers of Achaemenid chronology and hegemony at sites across the empire. In particular, various site reports recently include publications of Achaemenid bowls that are allowing for refinement of their own internal chronology, so that an understanding of developments over the course of the Achaemenid period is rapidly taking shape. Achaemenid bowls are also important because of the ways that they factor into understanding the imperial impress. Their shape requires ways of drinking that mark a user as participating in Achaemenid ideology and behavior. And their tremendously widespread use in clay as well as silver demonstrates the spread of recognizably Achaemenid values across material and geography. These are utility objects with meaning. The campaniform column bases, so beautifully modeled at Persepolis, have also been examined in multiple other contexts, so that multi-columned halls, with or without such bases, or bell-shaped bases associated with columns in contexts other than multi-columned halls, are regularly mentioned in recent literature and incorporated into discussions of Achaemenid date, power, expression, and impact. I will not talk about this further today, as others will be speaking specifically about related architectural features later in our workshop, but just as an example of significant architectural discussions growing out of observations about columns, here are a few stone column elements from an Achaemenid building at Olankala in Azerbaijan. Discussion of elite iconography has taken off, both conceptually and in volume. I mention it here briefly, but we'll return to it in a moment. Scholarship has moved away from such simplistic ethnic labels as Greco-Persian, and now routinely investigates visual culture with a more nuanced eye. This includes expressions in glyptic art, funerary art, metalwork, sculpture, jewelry, painting, and much more. This aspect of scholarship will feature in several of the papers coming up in our workshop now. What I want to emphasize in this is recent research into these three major categories of material and visual expression often investigates them initially as being recognizably Persian or Achaemenid, and then moves on to think about what they suggest life looked like more broadly for those interacting with or within Achaemenid imperial impress. Scholarship has moved away from considering an ethnic moniker as sufficient or even desirable, and instead looks stringently at what objects suggest about the lives of the humans who created or used them. This is a current research trend reflected in the title and papers of our current workshop, with its emphasis on identity, alterity, and the imperial impress. One thing that's been interesting to me in working on this talk is the change in scholarship on kingship. Recent volumes on the Achaemenid court and palaces have investigated an astonishing array of subjects, including dress and court ritual, specific behaviors at court, such as drinking and dining or worshiping particular deities, multi-gendered court personnel, and ways in which Achaemenid royal expressions found their roots in earlier practices or influenced later, sometimes much later, ones. The huge apparatus of the court has come to the fore, including the number and variety of personnel required to keep the court and indeed the empire running, specific aspects of imperial administration, and connections between kingship and cult. Again, various aspects of these cutting-edge trends are featured in the contributions to our current workshop. Persepolis itself has recently come into its own in this scholarly context. It provides a great example of what I mentioned earlier, the mainstreaming of Achaemenid material and visual culture. The textbook I use to teach our big introductory survey course on Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome, Art History by Marilyn Stockstad, now includes multiple pages and images of Persepolis as part of its presentation of the ancient world. Recent specialized investigations of Persepolis include publication of the evidence for the vibrant color that once adorned its sculptures and inscriptions, the tremendous resources found in its archives, and exciting new architectural studies that make clear the form and function of the city that surrounded it, as well as the buildings on the palace terrace itself. One trend that's currently seeing a lot of attention by our Iranian colleagues has to do with movement through space at Persepolis. The Getty Museum's online exhibit, Persepolis Reimagined, is a great example of ways digital humanities enables consideration of architecture and space. This is something others too are investigating, including such approaches as applying spatial syntax theory to the treasury, an idea explored by Matt Naglack at Boston College that I have found valuable in teaching, where you can consider spatial nodes, accessibility, useware and sightlines in the treasury, and then overlay Schmidt's maps of find spots to allow students to reconstruct the building's use and last hours. I want to end today by singling out two trends in scholarship that initially appeared diametrically opposed and are therefore all the more exciting. One recent trend involves specific studies of particular images or material categories. Another investigates big geographical areas through regional studies or communication networks. One fine example of the former trend is the ongoing publication of Achaemenid glyptic art, the art of seals. I want to elaborate on some features of this work now, as this is an area otherwise not emphasized in our current workshop. The impressions left by seals on the tablets of the Persepolis Fortification Archive provide an unparalleled corpus of visual material that enables investigation into many aspects of Achaemenid culture: kingship and power, ritual landscapes, particular motifs such as archers or chariots, and much more. Here, for instance, is the seal of the Persian queen Irtash-Duna, whom Herodotus called Artistone and described as Darius the Great's favorite wife. PFS 38, as deployed on the tablets of the archive, lets us trace Irtash-Duna's actions and see her tremendous wealth and power at work. It illuminates visual connections to Egypt and displays idiosyncrasies such as the possibly female figure emerging from a starry nimbus, as well as other aspects of its iconography and style which embed it solidly within a familiar Persepolitan framework. Because the Fortification Archive includes written documents as well as seals, it allows study of linked images and texts to create dossiers of individual humans experiencing life in the empire. It recenters Persepolis in a richer, more dynamic way by contextualizing its glorious architecture and sculpture, demonstrating how pivotal the site was in imperial workings, how its people behaved in real life and time. It adds individual nuance and activity to our understanding of the imperial impress. Other glyptic studies since 2000 have been numerous. I'm showing you here seals from Sardis just because they're pretty. I kind of covet that one in the middle. Istanbul Archaeological Museum's 4641, should you wish to know. But there have been investigations of seals and seal impressions from Anatolia, Egypt, the Levant, Babylonia, Elam, Central Asia, and the Central Heartland in Fars. These publications have in turn informed numismatic studies and shed different kinds of light on our understanding of relief sculpture. Investigations into glyptic visual culture have allowed for studies of such issues as gender, warfare, cult, cultural exchange, social memory, language and power, onomastica, artist-patron interactions, geographically specific visual expressions, and court protocol. We can use glyptic to consider local participation in Achaemenid administration and visual authority. We can see individuals expressing identity within a system of norms and emphasizing their alterity in myriad ways. This is just one example of investigation of a particular artifact category in the last 20-odd years and the doors it's opened for scholarly investigation. At the same time, big studies of broad areas have been taking off, particularly in the last 10 years. These include major regional studies, for instance, of Paphlagonia, or Lydia, or Caria, or Lycia, or Anatolia as a whole, or Egypt, or large swaths of Iran. This research trend often incorporates in a single publication consideration of various media and sites, and scholars have tended to consider their region within its own long history to look at the ways local pre-Achaemenid traditions had an impact on local responses to the Achaemenid imperial impress. The subject of communication networks has also seen intensive recent investigation. A huge amount of scholarship is underway that considers network theory, the road systems, movement through the landscape, intervisibility, and communication strategies overall. Of particular interest in scholarship at the moment is the question of water and access to water. The opportunities created by digital humanities and landscape archaeology are being developed by scholars to provide insight into the functioning of large areas of the Achaemenid Empire on a logistical and quotidian basis. These broader studies of communication networks, like the consideration of larger imperial regions, draw on an enormous array of evidence, including the ever-increasing power of landscape studies enabled by GIS, remote imagery, and digital mapping techniques. Such studies, combined with ongoing investigations into such overarching and shared human concerns as power and memory, religion and death, eating and drinking, coercion and resistance, identity and alterity, are revolutionizing what we can say about the Achaemenid Empire altogether. With so many trends underway concurrently, ours is a particularly rewarding time to engage with Achaemenid material and visual culture studies. My brief overview today cannot do it justice. It is thrilling to be part of this new Achaemenid workshop series and the interactions and discoveries it will enable. It is thrilling to anticipate the current trends in research regarding Achaemenid material and visual culture that the presentations of the next 3 days will illuminate. Thank you.